American Club Collapse Syndrome. This is something silently killing off critical infrastructure all across America. Former venerable groups that did so much for the country, all kinds of volunteer groups, history groups, support groups, they're all mostly in full collapse. All the mainline denomination churches and churches with old people are just plummeting. VFW, American Legion, heading down. Masons just declining, folding left and right. Groups like Toastmasters, Rotary, JC, Kiwanis, Lions, Elks, all these Lodge, all these different things are falling. What happened with this? Well, one of the biggest things is failure to get next generations in. There's the generation today with technology, you connect more with other people, but you do it electronically. Somehow someone has to figure out how to get young people to reanimate the groups of these that survived, to have people do the connection and do volunteer activities like be Boy Scout leaders and community support stuff. How to do that, I'm not smart enough. But here's part of the syndrome. You have a group of great people that know each other, that have for generations gone on, gotten young people and brought them in. Most of these groups, some 50 years ago, stopped doing that. There's a syndrome that you have where a group gets old enough, like everyone over 60. It can run perfectly well, but new people, age 20, come in a group and see people all with white hair like this. They're not likely going to connect. They're going to leave, and it's understandable. If you're in your young 20s, you might be looking for a partner, you have issues with kids. You're not going to want to, hang around with the gray hairs. That's just the truth. But people my age that can still live for another 20 years older than me and keep groups like this alive. But here's the problem of doing that. As you get a declining number of people who are simply declining with a particular group, a church, one of these clubs, or anything, they get into a death spiral where they simply can't recover. As the group does less things, less people are going to want to join, more people will quit. It goes downhill. Now, sometimes this just works its way out and people stop attending. But other times you'll get a core of maybe 10 people that isn't a critical mass to have the group do its function. They'll feel guilty that it's not working. They work really hard to try to keep it alive. They keep trying new things, but it simply fails. They either don't have enough critical mass or culture has changed and young people just don't see the purpose in this historical organization or whatever. So the downside that makes this really bad, particularly with a church, is when they can't admit they're reaching end game. End game is an important thing. They keep on pushing. All their assets, particularly in a church, get declined. They become worthless. They can't, if they are bricks and mortars, they can't keep up the building. The building declines right under their noses, doesn't keep value, and gets close to worthless. And all these poor elderly people put all this effort in something that simply can't work. So they feel guilty. They work hard with their last remaining energy to keep the group afloat. No one will talk about the elephant in the room, that it can't, and they end up wasting their last decent years of life trying to keep this group alive. That's a sad syndrome when it happens, particularly for religious groups. They'll try to keep this order, this group, alive at all costs, and it doesn't work. So this is a sad thing. What are solutions to this? Well, if you're in a group that's successful, you have to focus very hard on how to get the next generation in, how to understand how these people work, reach out, mentor them, train them to get more of their own kind to be strong. You also, as part of making that work, get other generations in. Your group has to make concessions. Culture changes. History changes in time. Old people of all people should realize that and be willing to forfeit control and admit, hey, we did it this way. but these young people, they want to do it that way. You got to roll with that. Otherwise, your group and all its great objectives simply die. Here's another thing that the Masons have done, but churches usually can't, except for Catholic churches. That's when you have a small little group here that's not critical mass to stay alive, and a small little group over here. Both groups are going to want to have the other group fold, capture all their members, but here's why that doesn't happen. The individual groups that have a long history, they want to be the group that other groups fold and come to them, but that usually doesn't happen. Two groups that don't have critical mass will just fizzle like two coals in a fire that get pulled apart. They don't have enough heat, so both end up going away. Ideally, in an ideal world, Catholics make this happen. They tell this parish, you're too small to have a building like that, and hey, you over there are too small. We're going to dictate. This group here, you're going to have to bloop, be part of this. Now you can stay alive. The group over here that has to fold and join this group, they may not be happy about that, but the top-down rigid hierarchy of Masons and Roman Catholics can force that to happen. For other groups, without that, all the individual groups wink out and go away. So the other thing that has to happen if you're in part of a group like that is understand endgame. Sometimes these groups have assets, physical property, or they have an endowment. You can't just let that go away or be spent down by old people who will not be able to connect with the next generation. The group has to be wise enough, particularly if you have assets, to say, how do we fold? There's a way to have endgame for a group where you can, for example, in a group like I'm in, keep your web page present and still in existence. Admit you can't do the big meetings anymore and have people physically come to meeting. Groups often have to admit that can't happen. A possible endgame is the remaining people dissolve the main purpose of the group, admit honestly they can't do that, but still be part of a social group, or go into suspension where if the generation not yet born decides to get into part of society, these maybe a group could be reanimated. There's a way to go into suspension. This is the end of this particular talk. I could use help getting this common syndrome that affects thousands and thousands of groups better understood. If someone can help me make the animations, the videos, the better images and things that go along with this, all this message should be shortened down and can help some of these people in dying groups not feel the guilt when the inevitable hits. But the main part of the message is out. I'll just briefly talk about living this out in a group called PHACT, P-H-A-C-T, the Philadelphia Association for Critical Thinking. This is just to put a face on it, personal experience. In around 1991, we got started with help from a national group that represents critical thinking, a very important cause to provide immunization to people's minds, to not join cults, extremist ideologies, and to recognize BS and false anti-scientific practices and paranormal claims. It's an important cause. It's still being done in our Philadelphia group that I'm one of the dozen founding members. Only, 6 or 7 of us still live. We started that. It went okay. We barely had enough critical mass to have lectures and have young people show up. The way we used to be able to get young people is for this group to be an extension of a college and get professors to get students to get extra credit and go to our lectures. That's how we were able to get people for a while. Our group got to the point where we can no longer ethically ask a speaker to come in and talk to only a dozen people. Back when we could get 50 people, then it was worth the speaker's time coming in. So in our group, luckily 2 wise women, who are the last of our worker bees, people willing to take the time to make the group happen, came to the conclusion that there's just not a way to pull out, and they both together gave notice that they just wouldn't be doing this anymore. So in Endgame, the group is still in, the hopeful decision is to, if no one else can step up and make this happen and really successfully reach out and get the number of young people in to make it worthwhile, we probably go into suspension, and still the great people that have the friendships meet at least once or twice a year socially, but not fool ourselves that we can take on the big objective that we did for a while, but never as good as perhaps we should have. So we also have to figure out what to do with the remaining assets in the group. The national group that supports, and the worldwide organization that supports critical thinking, will probably, before just having our assets dissolve, just give them give that money to them. So the other thing that we have to do is we have a large mailing list and connection to people that are like-minded. That's something that we want to hold on to, and maybe at least periodically send information to them, maybe recommend those people to still be in the fight, even if the group can't be alive. If someone shows up in 10 or 20 years that wants to reanimate the group, some of that list might be useful if any of those people are still either alive or young enough to have the energy to do it. So those are possible issues to work out for Endgame. Another thing that our group might do is pivot to not do the public meetings, but have something else to have a purpose for being alive. But I, as a volunteer person, have to agree with the two women that spoke about the elephant in the room, that I, as a volunteer who has limited time left to do good in the world, I need to work for a group where I can reach a lot of people. I shouldn't just stay with a fact that would have a meeting of maybe 10 to 15 people and have to drive all the way down to Philadelphia once a month to do that. There's not enough ethical, humanitarian bang for the buck in it for me to continue doing that. I have to either be part of another group that does stuff or create a new group to try to reach out and help people. I'm personally going to try to do that with videos and enter the YouTube, TikTok, Instagram space that young people have, and this probably won't work, and make an effort to reach out, find a way through their medium where I never meet these people face to face, and try to get some of the best of the ideals from my generation before, the timeless things, and see is there a way to hand them off to young people. That's an experiment that I'm going to try to do with around 100 videos like this. So this is the end of my rant on this. It's difficult to be emotionally, to be part of a group that simply can't continue, but you're better off emotionally to just admit this thing can't go on. Every tree that gets planted eventually has to die. People have trouble, particularly with their own life, admitting that that won't go on forever either. But I encourage anyone who's part of a group that's happening to not feel guilt about it. There's changes that happen. What you have to do is still be positive, and if that group can't survive, don't give up on humanity. Find other ways to connect with people. Don't make it a personal failure and feel bad if your effort to keep this old group alive didn't work. You have to be happy for when the group was at its best. Remember that, and maybe see opportunity to help some other group that can engage young people, because that's what it's part. Life in society is part of. You have to reach out and connect with younger generation. Every group of old people has times where they say this conversation that starts kids these days. That doesn't help. We have to, wherever we can, even if we're not breeder people, try to connect with young people. There might be just different ways to do it, maybe one-on-one rather than a group. So, okay, that's all I got. Bye-bye.